Hello and welcome back to another tasty tutorial. Today we are learning how to make a sushi cube. We'll learn a couple of things about bevels, we'll learn a couple of things about UV unwrapping or UV unwrapping for these purposes. So if you'd like to join in and let's do something cool. If you enjoyed the content, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot so I can keep doing these videos. So let's get into it. Open up a new file in Blender. I'm gonna select everything in the scene, press X to delete it. You can also follow the screen cap keys in the bottom left corner so we can get through the tutorial just a bit faster. Shift A, add a mesh, a cube. We're gonna scale down that cube to about a scale of 0.5, something like that. Reset that scale. And I'm gonna add a modifier, which is going to be a bevel modifier. After that modifier, I'm going to add a subdivision modifier. So it looks like that. You can play with the offset of your bevel modifier. Let's say to an offset of 0.14, W to shade smooth, and it should look something like this. You can always increase your segments and go for a nicer or sharper corner look. We're going to duplicate that by pressing Shift D and just pushing it up. So it looks like this from our front view. And now we're going to do the nori wrap. I think it's nori, so the seaweed. I'm just going to add another cube. This cube, I will try and move it to be about the size of both of these cubes. In edit mode, I'm going to press Ctrl R, and then I'm going to add 2 loop cuts, and I'll just delete the ones that are on the sides. So Ctrl I to inverse your selection. Press X and delete those vertices. So you end up with something like this. One thing to keep in mind is that the top is going to be the salmon, the bottom is going to be the rice. When we add the rice, it's going to puff up a bit, so we need to correct this rectangle so it works perfectly. In our case, I'm just going to add a bevel, solidify, and then I'm going to add a subdivision after that. Subdivision, I'm going to put it to 2. Then I can go into scale, Shift Y, so I can scale it on the Z and X axis, and I can just make it wrap around my structure. Then for fine tuning, I can just choose my thickness of the actual solidify and push it down. Then I can just manipulate the thickness with my solidify. Press W to shade smooth, so we have a nice smooth surface. We can increase the subdivisions a bit, which gives us even more wiggle room for our solidify. One more thing, we're going to make a wooden plate. And this is going to be just a simple cube that's going to be scaled on Z and then scaled on X and Y by pressing S, holding Shift and then pressing Z. So we scale it up like that. I'm going to go into front view so I can position my plate a bit better. And I'm just going to pull it under my nori right there. Now we will be working in a more isometric view. So I'm going to press 5 on my numpad and I can see my isometric view directly. So this is how I would like to position this object. I can also add a camera. So Shift A camera, Control Alt 0 on your numpad, and then it's going to position the camera directly from your view. My camera settings, I'm going to change the perspective to orthographic, and I'm going to move this orthographic out a bit. This is the step you usually do towards the end, but there's a particular reason why I'm doing it now. I'm just going to change the resolution to 1080 because I'll probably be posting this to Instagram. Just going to recorrect the orthographic scale so I have my object filling most of the frame. If you're sometimes a bit undecided on how to position your object, you can also use the composition guides under your viewport display. So let's say third. And you can then try to position your object aligned to these thirds or these guides. It can help you improve the positioning of your object in your camera view. Just a quick tip. So now it's time to finish off the plate. Just Ctrl A to reset the scale, and I'm going to bevel it. So I'm going to press Ctrl B, bevel the whole thing, maybe increase a couple of these cuts and push it like that. Shade smooth, so it looks like that. So we have nice rounded corners. Now we can move to materials. So I'm going to divide my screen, and the right side, I'm going to set it to be my shader editor. And I'm also going to drop down my top and set it to be the UV editor. If you're wondering how I made the sidebar disappear, is just press N when your mouse is inside of the shader editor. We're going to start with the salmon. I'm going to add a material, press Ctrl T, and that's going to put my texture coordinate and mapping plus image texture nodes. If you don't have this, go into your edit mode preferences and under add-ons, search for node wrangler and enable it. Those shortcuts will be working fine. For my image texture, I'm not going to choose it here. I'm just going to start setting it up here. So I'm going to open a salmon texture that I just downloaded from the web. Now, mind you, the better the resolution, the better the final result, because we will be using this to just control a couple of things over here. For our little salmon piece, I'm just going to press U and project from view. That's gonna project the texture directly onto my object. If we go into viewport shading, you can see nothing is happening because we need to also choose our image texture here in the node. I'm just gonna choose it there, and you can see it just wrapped around the object like that. So for this, we'll need to connect a couple more things. I'm gonna shift add a displacement node, and I'm gonna add also a bump node. The bump node, I'm gonna feed it into the normal, while the displacement, we can organize these a bit better. The displacement is going to go into the displacement socket of the output. Now for the displacement and bump, I'm going to go for the displacement and shift add a new RGB to black and white. So I'm going to add the color of my salmon and I'm going to put the value into the height. Now I can control this height with the scale, though until we open some additional settings, this won't be extremely clear. With the color, I'm just going to go into height. Next up, I'm just going to work on my rice. So for the rice, I'm going to do the same thing. Another way you can do this is you can just go into your right, copy the material with your salmon material selected, choose your rice, paste the material, and then just change the texture and it's going to be there. I'm going to repeat the same process for the next two elements. So I'm just going to fast forward through it. So now that we've created all of these materials, we can start fine-tuning the whole thing. I'm currently in Eevee, so I'll be switching to cycles and I'll be setting my GPU compute, and very important, the feature set needs to be experimental. We'll return to these settings a bit later, but for now we're going to work on these. Now I want to add a subdivision surface to my wooden plate and check adaptive. I also want to check adaptive for all of the elements in the scene because we will be using micro displacement. You can do that by just going into your material and under displacement, choose displacement and bump. Do that for all of the materials. I'm just going to go into my layout and put a render region. So it means it's going to render everything in the camera view, but nothing else. And let's go into our rendered view so we can check out what's happening. As you can see, there are a couple of things that we still need to correct and that are not working properly, but for the time being, it's fine. It's doing okay. I'm just going to go into my render properties, choose under film transparent so I don't have the background. And now I'll just fine tune a bit the materials. As I told you, the rice was going to start and clip through the seaweed, so we need to scale that just slightly, so we're covering and creating that illusion of squeezing. Now for the salmon, we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, the displacement is way too strong, at least for my taste, so I'm going to drop it down to about 0.01, 0.02 maybe. I'm just going to drop the roughness down so it gets that wet type of look. Maybe increase the clear coat to about, let's say, 3 or 4. You can also put the normal of the bump into the clear coat bump, so it will also affect the normals of the clear coat. And now the big thing I tried to do, and it turned out kind of okay, was to connect the color to the subsurface color and then increase the subsurface to 1. You can then try and remove the basic color or add it again, so that's personal preference, but I found out that when looking from afar, it gets a really interesting texture. In the case of the seaweed, I'm just going to take away the displacement and put a bit more of strength into the bump, so it gets a bit more bumpiness. We can rescale the texture of our algae. So we can do sort of a 2, 2, 2, something like that. Take a look from a distance. So it looks like something like that. For our rice, we're going to do the same technique. So I'm just going to connect the subsurface color, increase the subsurface so we get this nice fluffy sort of feeling, decrease the roughness to about 0.1, 0.2, maybe something like that. So we have nice shine, glossiness. Specular can go to about 0.6, 0.7. At least that's how I tested it and it worked completely fine. You can also increase the strength of your bump, but that's basically it. For our wooden plank, I can just take away the subdivision. I can take away the displacement since I don't need it. I'm just going to check in the viewport shading. I can increase the bump strength, maybe just slightly more, but not too much. So it looks something like that. And I can just go with the roughness a bit lower and with the specular a bit higher. And then dial in the specular tint as I would like to. Back in my rendered view, I'm going to go on my right side, select the world, add a Control-T texture, coordinate, and mapping node. And then I'll just manipulate the Z-axis to find a really good position. This looks kind of interesting, so maybe we could do something like this. And when we have it, or when we like what we're seeing, maybe we want to accentuate the bumpiness, maybe we want to accentuate the color, depends on whatever you want to do. But in this case, I think this one looks really beautiful. We get that nice little tint with the subsurface and everything. If we want to, we can also set like some sort of light, let's say an area lamp or something like that. So we can just accentuate one or the other side, something like that maybe. Let's go into our setup over here, increase the power. Let us just find a nice little potent power over here. Let's say 150. And then we can move it, light it like so. I'm just trying to find a good accent for our rice. And that looks kind of tasty, I have to admit. So that's gonna be it. This is how you make a really tasty looking sushi piece. I strongly suggest you try it out, try different lighting techniques, try different textures. I will have a story type of tutorial ready on my Instagram. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out. I will also be opening a Patreon soon. I'm just trying to work out the details and what type of additional value I can offer you guys. There's definitely going to be a tier where you can get the source files for the tutorials that I was doing in that month. So that's going to definitely be an option. I'm also thinking about private calls if you guys have any specific questions or whatever. So we'll see what happens. In any case, thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one. Bye.